then I would like to start. And I think, believe it or not, all organizations do have a design operating model, but not all organizations are intentional about creating it. Often it gets established by accident and without deliberate thought. And in this situation, design gets fitted around other work and priorities of business or technology. And in the worst case scenario, design ends up being a means to fix what development has already delivered. And as a result, organizations struggle to create valuable experiences for their customers. And this is why organizations need to be deliberate about shaping and evolving their design operating model, bringing design, business, and technology perspectives together at an even eye level. And in the next 30 minutes, Nina and I will share how to do this and how to transform your organization to become customer value driven. But before you start, you may ask us, what brings Nina and myself to this topic?
Well, it's quite funny because I'm not a designer at all by trade. I'm very passionate about this topic, but if I go back 20 years ago, I wasn't. And that passion evolved out of several things on my journey. As a former software developer, I loathed rewriting code. I think every software developer hates doing that. And it took me many years to appreciate the importance of not only a design practice, but how listening and co-creating with design actually makes your time a more valuable investment. The second one was also the observation. Spent years with Microsoft watching how they observed people in their labs, seeing how users use products and not leveraging a massive amount of feature and functionality that we had implemented, which leads you to the point of, great, I've just spent the last 6 months doing something for nothing. All of these are really important starting points to start to realize the understanding of design and development coming together is not just important, but getting design working with business and technology is one of the key factors. Now, Sabrina, on the other hand, comes from a very different background.
Yes, I do, Nina. I am a designer at heart. And over time, one of the things I learned is that it's actually not about me having the brilliant idea, but it is about the collaboration between different roles and expertise that enables us to truly create extraordinary experiences for people. And this is why I believe that our role as designers, beyond design itself, is to invite others into the process and to create an environment that encourages creativity and collaboration. And it's important to know, Nina and me, we are both thought workers, so we are consultants. And this means that clients bring us in to help them establish and evolve their design operating model. So, but what is the purpose, Nina, of an intentional design operating model?
Well, that's always a very good question, because the purpose of a design operating model is, I'm stating the blatantly obvious here, placing the customers at the center of all we do. But what's not obvious is not just design that's placing the customer at the center of everything we do. It's the whole entire organization. Customers and users come first. The second thing that is really blatantly obvious is focusing on customer value outcomes as a default, as a strong digital product team. It should not be output driven, which is often related to null value to customers. However, we're on that perpetual battle of being given a project plan, being able to deliver something on time, in scope, and within cost, often leads product teams down that route of losing the hindsight of what value is. The other is creating an environment and conditions for design to flourish. We don't do that. Often it ends up being design chasing development, and often there isn't a co-creation where design is accepted. So having a healthy environment where cross-practice collaboration is actually embraced across the organization, putting customer in the power of actually being the forefront, really helps. Now, all of this sounds the usual blah, 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 heard it all before, nothing new, nothing different. So we want to actually make this more tangible by looking at how we put customers in the center of everything we do. How do we get everyone, not just the project team, but the whole entire organization involved in using and thinking about the customer values? And how, how can we create, more importantly, the right conditions in the environment for design to flourish?
Well, I brought a framework, Nina, that helps us to zero in on this. And it's a framework for a design operating model. And all models are wrong, but some are useful. And this model enables us to zero in on the dimensions that we need to consider and the levers that we can use to bring design on an even level with business and technology. And there are 4 dimensions in this model that include, of course, customers, users, and the market for whom we are creating the products and services. But then there's also the organizational context, product teams, and practices such as design, business, and technology. And 3 of these dimensions are within the organization. And for each of these, we can ask, how is the purpose of the design operating model realized? So, for example, how does the organization place the customer at the center of the strategy? How do teams stay focused on customer value outcomes? And how do communities of practice create the environment for design to flourish? And actually, how does the organization foster this? And if we look further across the organizational dimensions, we have 3 levers and constraints that we need to consider to affect change. There are, of course, people with their capabilities, mindsets, and incentives that drive behavior. There are rituals, processes, and tools, and that can include things like a design system. And finally, we have structures of the organization, the program, the team, but also the physical environment. And looking at all this, we also see that across these levers, actually, they alone are not effective for creating change. It also requires strategic and operational alignment between the product teams and the organization. It requires socializing of the message across teams and departments and the whole organization, actually, so that we can take them on a journey with us and help them see for themselves the value that this design operating model can create. Now, if we look a little bit closer at this model, you will notice that it represents an integrated approach. At the core of the operating model, design, business, and technology collaborate together, jointly shaping strategy and a common governance model. This is key to enable organizations to lead by strategy, where we have a common North Star and goals towards which we work together. And this is in contrast to organizations who may lead by structure, which is often built around power and dividing up work by department or even supplier. So if design is positioned rightly, where the customer value is at the heart of the organization, this enables the appropriate governance model, one that enables us to lead by strategy. So this is the model, and we can use it to be intentional about designing our design operating model, but it also helps us to assess where our organization is today. And Nina will share 2 scenarios to illustrate this.
So these scenarios sound blatantly obvious, but actually they're not. So I want us to do just a little bit of a pause and do a bit of a reflection. Over the last sort of 10, 15 years, there's been a bit of a battle going on between technology and business, where we've been trying to get technology at the table as an equal eye height in terms of discussion. And there, on the very first point that we start the journey, we're actually doing the same thing now with design, what we were doing with technology 10 or 15 years ago. Now, a true start sounds blatantly obvious, and I'm going to iterate this anyhow to make sure everybody's on the same page. We're talking about a best case situation where ideally design is involved in the very, very, very first step of identifying what is the problem, right? Not when the problem has been identified and then design comes in. Now, in a perfect world, all these 3 circles, design, business, and technology, would not only have elements of a strategy together, they would also have joint goals, which means bringing customer centricity to life, not what you have in most companies today, which is what they write on paper. We're doing this program, we're doing this project, we're delivering to customer centricity, we're doing the proverbial end-to-end seamless experience. In reality, the execution shows a very different story. And the very different story is the aha moment of the false start. And this actually happened by one client, where we started to look at, the recognition design was not equally at the table with business and technology. Actually, design was just sort of off to one side. It wasn't even acknowledged in the organization. And when talking with the designers and listening to their blunt frustrations, one of them turned around and basically said to me, do you know what? Design is seen as a means to fix and improve what the developers or process designers have done. So they were almost too late in the game. And the false start is obviously this situation where design is brought in, not at the beginning, but later. They have this proverbial catch up that they're doing. They can never be ready in time for development. Development's under pressure. They've got a sprint to deliver. They've got a showcase to do. They're just going to do it. Now, at best, this is, rework. And I say at best. At worst case scenario, it is complete product failure. But what's worse about all of this is the product team is doing a lot of rework, creating a lot of redundancy, and actually being incredibly ineffective just because they're under pressure to deliver on time and in cost. Design is parked. However, no journey, whatever we do, can be without flaws. Doesn't matter how good we are. So let's just take a step back and do a check-in on the reality.
Well, reality, that's the key word, I think, for me, Nina. And this is where we will bring things to life by sharing two stories. And the first story is a story of a true start that I will share. And design here was integrated with a lightweight approach from day one. And then Nina will share a second story, the false start, where we move from a situation of the design operating model being accidental towards making it intentional. So looking at the first story, when we look at the program today, we see that it is a large program of work with many teams of over 100 people. And they are a high-performing program with an efficient design operating model. The key to success here is that teams have visibility of upcoming stories 2 sprints ahead of the delivery sprint. This creates an environment that gives teams time and space to prepare. So they can carry out user research, create designs, carry out experiments, but also create new components for the design system so that they are actually ready and added into the design system before they get even used the first time. So let's have a brief look at how today's processes and key rituals enable this operating model. And the first thing that we see is prioritization that takes place every 4 weeks, and it involves all product owners from all teams across the whole program. They sit together and prioritize the story for the month ahead. Now, this is a big coordination effort, but it provides the needed visibility for teams 2 sprints ahead of the delivery sprint. And it still allows for adaptability of what comes next at a 4-week cadence. So that's still pretty agile. Then in the preparation phase, the following rituals and processes and tools fuel the design operating model. In this situation, we have assigning a feature driver. And this can be a BA, a designer, or developer who is responsible for the feature kickoff and preparation, but they collaborate with others to achieve this. Next, we have the research and ideation phase, where teams create a shared understanding of customer needs and collaborate on the solution. And actually, this is not a linear process as it might look from the visualization here. Teams iterate to explore and find the best solutions. So they're going back and forth and try out different things. Now, the next key ritual in our process here is the design huddle. And it is a key ritual for designers where they do design critiques, They discuss everything that happens in the application so that they're able to create a coherent service design. And here they also discuss new components that are needed for the design system. And finally, in the preparation phase, we have also the front-end guild, who plays an important role, because the guild actually owns and evolves the design system, and it has its own backlog of work. So you might ask, how does the guild evolve the design system? Well, designers fill this backlog after they have discussed new components in the design huddle. And of course, after testing it with users. Then the guild creates documents and makes the new component usable so that it is ready and added to the design system before it gets used for the first time in the delivery sprint. And finally, in the delivery sprint, designers and developers pull components from the design system and deliver the desired feature. The design system is our hero here. It acts as a single source of truth and is an important tool that facilitates collaboration among design and tech. Now, I have to admit, this is actually an ideal scenario. There are still situations where this process fails, and a team may need a component faster than it goes through this process. And in this case, teams build the component first, and it gets incorporated into the design system afterwards. Now, if we step back a little, we see that these 6 rituals, processes, and tools fuel the design operating model. But how did the program get here? And how did the team ignite design from day one? And actually, how might you create this traction in your organization? Let's look at the journey. And actually, the program started small, with just a handful of multidisciplinary product teams, each with a single dedicated designer. And they started with the lightweight design operating model. There were 2 challenges that emerged over time that were caused by team structure and that affected the people within this design operating model. Some of the product teams had a lot of design work, more than others, which resulted in some designers being overloaded while others were idle. And designers were also not able to play to their strengths. Well, the team embraced the pain, they learned and adapted. And this led to the creation of a design pod, which had all designers in it, and it served all product teams. The great thing was that it enabled designers to share their work more evenly and assign work based on individual strengths. Problem solved, right? Hooray. Well, actually, the program continued to evolve, of course, and people joined more and more product teams were created. And this was a change in both people and structure. And with this new growth, the way design operated was not efficient and effective anymore. It created pains for designers and developers. Designers had to always recreate what they were building, and developers had to copy and paste from different code bases. But there was also no versioning. So when developers copied things, they didn't even know if it was the latest version. And of course, this situation also created pain for customers because slowly the experience started to become inconsistent. And this led to the creation of a design system. And it was initiated by a designer and developer who wanted to make the collaboration among developers and designers easier. They wanted to reduce boring tasks such as copying and pasting, but they also wanted to just be able to move quicker and create an application that is consistent and fun to use for users. So how did those 2 people, the designer and the developer, manage to gather so much momentum that it eventually led to the creation of the front-end guild? And then how did the guild foster the adoption of the design system by others? Well, they did not achieve this by enforcing a top-down approach. Instead, they did this by collaborating, pulling in other designers and developers from different teams and jointly evolve the design system. They also used a lightweight bottom-up approach where teams first created components within the context of their individual micro front ends, see them working, and only at the end add them to the design system. In the beginning, this had the benefit of limiting risk so that we don't end up creating something in a central place that then doesn't fit any front end in practice. How they also managed to drive adoption was through continuous selling. As new teams evolved, they needed to resell again and again why the design system is important. And so they did. And as new components were added, their value also needed to be sold to teams. But keep in mind that actually just selling is not enough. In some cases, when a complex component was added, it may also require capability building so that teams are able to use the new components. So beyond understanding value, knowing how to use them, super important. Finally, the guild also gathered momentum by, well, bi-directional knowledge sharing. That means the front-end guild visited other guilds to share their knowledge, but they also had guests who came to the front-end guild and learned from them. So they might have the QA or security guild coming over. So this is how, in this context, the team ignited design and the design operating model and the adoption of the design system. Now, as the program grew even more, adding people and more teams, we saw the creation of domains, each with its dedicated design pod. And each pod could vary in the number of designers that supported it. This had the benefit of providing focus for designers, reducing context switching and cognitive load. But it also made it harder to stay aligned. And with this new structure, the design huddle was especially important to enable, one, designers to understand what happens in other domains, but also to have a common design and language. But finally, it also helped them to negotiate how to help other domains. And this was in regards to tackling workload challenges, so helping out if another design pod was overloaded, but also tackling capability needs. For example, if a domain needed a strong researcher to support them, then this person might join the other domain for that time period, support them, and afterwards go back to their domain. And as this example shows, they lead by strategy, focused on common goals and outcomes. They don't lead by structure, where a designer might just rigidly stay within their design pod or domain. Finally, this journey showed us that our design operating model must continuously evolve. We need to look at what makes sense today and evolve over time as the context changes. Now, this was the true start, and Nina will now share what a false start example looks like.
The false start example is actually something like a rude awakening for many that run into this. So we were talking earlier about organizations and structures. Often a false start is driven by structure. So I'm going to recap on some of the points that I mentioned earlier. We're talking about a situation where it's a big program, many different domains or clusters, however you want to term it, running in their little vertical empires, driven by structure, right? Very much output orientated. So they have very hard deadlines where the product owners are having to deliver on a certain time frame within a certain budget, and they are not really living anything to do with design. Design is in their team. They have, you know, the researchers, they have the UI designers, they have the front-end developers, but design is not there. It's not on an equal footing. So being very vertically steered, that means there is a weak or literally a no cross practice of collaboration. So the right-hand side has no transparency of what the left-hand side is doing. And that also means that there are variable best-in-class practices in design as a whole, because some designers will be stronger maybe in research, others might be more stronger in design system. So it ends up being a variable across the entire program based upon who is in which vertical. So this, in stark contrast to the first story, where we established lightweight design model, you know, right the way from the beginning as intentional, this is something where we are actually playing catch up, because of the false start that has happened, it started off unintentional. And all of a sudden, people started to realize, looking a little bit left, a little bit right, we now need to become intentional on this if we are going to provide a somewhat seamless end-to-end customer experience. So moving to the next slide, what I'm going to do with this is break it down for you. Now, originally, we started the journey with the proverbial, Houston, we've got a problem. Can you come in and help us? Now, at this point, we don't really understand what the problem is, other than design is struggling in the organization as a whole, hasn't really established its own guild, is having a lot of friction between the verticals and the understanding of customer centricity. And nobody, literally nobody, feels responsible for the end-to-end user experience, which is kind of a humorous matter in some ways. Because when you look at slides that are presented towards executive stakeholders that are up on the board level or just under the board level, what's the very first slide that comes on the table? We are driving customer centricity. Ironically, that is not the case. And as said earlier, design is seen as a means to fix and improve what development has already done. The first sort of 3 months is very much looking for quick pain relief, identifying root causes parallel, acknowledging they're going to require a little bit more depth and time to resolve. And the only way that you can start to get everyone to tunnel focus where they really need to be, you can't change the already defined goals of a big program. You're talking with a beast. They've got a clear deadline date. They've put multi-millions into delivering something. So the only thing that you can do is quickly aggregate an experience strategy and outcomes that are clearly measurable. But within that, define what I call a near field North Star, which is no more than 6 months down the road, which gets everybody inside the design guild to focus on, but also communicates a message going on beyond the design guild to the organization of what design is going to be doing for the next 6 months. The other is what I call the heart of the organization, which is the design system and design transparency. We had a lot of challenges in there because the design system was really non-existent, and design transparency, nothing was being shared. And you started to see this because that goes on the point number on the 6th month, which is strengthening cross-pollination. If I don't know that somebody's already creating a header, and I already have 8 teams that created their own header, but then I go across and make my own header, all of a sudden you have a multiplication of 50 headers appearing across this whole entire end-to-end experience. And it's not providing an intuitive or conducive effect for the end user. So looking at tools that they have versus tools that are missing, that you say, okay, we've got white spots here, we need to bring in other tools that are going to actually increase cross-collaboration and transparency. Now that's one side of the fence of the design system. The other side of the fence is the UI integration patterns, which is also important for the UI baseline. So if architects on the program are not looking into what are default UI patterns that need to be actually developed and lived by, then of course front-end development are going to be doing something that they feel is right. So you already have an underlying trend that starts to change, even right down to what technology are they using. Is it Angular or is it something else? And this starts to raise the question of how much duplication is really, truly needed. And finally, if a design system is lagging behind, and if the verticals are frustrated because they're not able to move at the speed that they want to, and that goes back to looking at the outcomes for the 6 months, which is having design ready at a sprint -2, then we need to give a steroid boost. And a steroid boost means having commitment from the actual clusters that says, okay, you can take my UX, UI designers and 2 front-end developers for a hackathon and go ahead, but I expect the outcome to be you're going to deliver UI coded components, not sketches, not something in InVision, a proper hardcore UI coded component. Now, at this point, it sounds all fine and dandy, but there's a lot of finer details that go behind this. You're obviously looking at a hackathon that actually produces a first step definition of done, which is we've delivered 43 UI coded components out of the original 50 that was planned. We have a clear spillover plan, how we're going to handle the remaining. We know when they're going to be completed. Now that message can go back to the program as a message of success, but it's not the true definition of done. So it's being able to sell what you've achieved in order to get buy-in, to continue the journey, and to get design in the org at the right eye height level. By saying that, what I mean is the next step that design would have to do is find the relevant clusters that are going to take the UI coded components and actually pioneer and run that through in their backlog, get it implemented, and then get it signed off. Because at the end of the day, that all has an impact on the UI baseline audit. Now, looking at this, that is the intention here, is to try to boost up design, that it has the relevant tools, the relevant UI coded components, that it gets closer to sprint -2. Now, in a perfect world, it would land on sprint -2, but after one hackathon, that will never happen, right? The second thing is by catalyzing the strengthening of cross-pollination, so having transparency of what each cluster is actually creating in a GitHub meant for designers to use, people start to then look a little bit left, a little bit right, and saying, actually, I need a grid very similar to what you have done. Is that following the actual audit, guidelines and rules and regulations that we have with design system? Yes. Now, the UI audit baseline, I guess, is a way of bringing the clusters to Jesus, if you want to call it. So if they've not complied to the design system guidelines, they need a damn good reason to justify why they've broken out of that. Likewise, the design system guidelines needs to have some level of flexibility. It can't be completely rigid. Each experience that the end user goes through will vary depending on what they're doing. And the other part is let designers lead, bring them in there right at the beginning when you're defining and understanding what the problem is, not after, not later. It's not about a beautiful picture drawn on the back of a napkin. This is highly technical stuff and can have a big input on the bottom line of your revenue with regard to your product, or at worst, your actual product success. If you don't get it right, you're going to fail. So when we look at the 9 month, we're now getting to a point where we've actually established design as being important. And why do I say this? They've started realizing that design, if implemented and understood in the right way, can actually enhance and improve delivery, meaning there's less rework being done, meaning I have more time to deliver more functionality, meaning that we're producing and co-creating high fidelity upfront and implementing high fidelity afterwards. Now, for design at this point, continuous evolution is happening, but also designers need to recalibrate the importance of design. We're very passionate about getting everything to flow perfect for the end user. But sometimes when we're replacing existing projects or products out there, what the end user is working with is an absolute catastrophe. So if we're able just to deliver a 20% improvement to that end user, that could be an 80% improvement. So we need to recalibrate in order to keep that delivering on time, delivering in cost. But we also need to educate the organization that we have to be there at the table, equal with business and technology, and we have to have joint goals in order to achieve that.
Wow, Nina, I'm still feeling with you and going through that journey again. And I think we've seen two great examples now. One, being intentional, how to be intentional in a true start situation, and how we can start being intentional in a false start situation. But the question that might still be on your mind is like, okay, I heard the two stories, super exciting, some real life examples, but how do I get started now? How do I create traction for design in my organization? And how can I help my organization to be truly customer value driven? And to help you get started, we brought some design igniters with us. Let's have a look at them. The first one, start small and intentional from day one. Whether you're in a true start or a false start situation, start by being intentional on day one, but start small, where you try things out in individual teams before scaling. And your approach doesn't have to be perfect or even complete. The intention is what counts.
So the second one is stating the blatantly obvious. It's, it's about SMART goals and outcomes, but it's common goals and outcomes. Talked about the strategy at the beginning. Don't disrupt what's already been put into place, but maybe sharpen it to be a little bit more near field. The other part is don't define it to be design goals across the organization as one big bang at the beginning. You haven't got the credo or credibility in order to establish that. But if you within design can start and to move that muscle power, often design at this point, due to the different verticals, is not aligning at all. So look at that to establish design ownership. Start within design, go beyond design to enable that faster adoption. It will gain traction. The other one that we're talking about is design needs to be aligned first. Now, you probably sat there going, huh? What does that mean? Often the common pitfall why design is truly misunderstood is what comes out of design as a guild or as a group is many different voices, many different opinions. You're not echoing as one voice, as one clarity of a message, which means the rest of the organization eventually starts to switch off and starts not to acknowledge and starts not to look at design and starts to park design to one place. So getting design aligned as one loud voice that is iterating and speaking the same thing over and over again, you will actually start to see that is adopted and taken within the organization. So one strong, consistent voice can be the pinnacle to start to get design actually rolling.
Next is to collaborate beyond design. So it is usually a default to collaborate within design. However, for design to be successful, we need to collaborate with others across the whole organization from different roles and different departments. Next, we also need to continuously evolve and communicate the design operating model. We need to take the whole organization on a journey, and we cannot sleep and our job is never done. We continuously need to evolve the design operating model and adapt to change. And we need to continuously communicate and sell its value.
And the last is something that I have become more and more passionate about, which is create the space and mechanism for creativity. The design ops model is not just about enabling design as a first thought, but it's also, and I say this really strongly, it's also to protect the time and headspace of everyone within design. And that is not just the designers, that is the whole organization. If you don't do that, you're not allowing people the opportunity to focus and to deliver the good quality work, which is what they want to achieve. It also allows everyone to focus on their respective craft.
And finally, we would love to leave you with these words. Enjoy the journey. You know your organization best. Adapt your approach to what is possible today. And regardless of the hurdles you see, do not be deterred. No journey is perfect, and every journey is unique. So be that person that ignites design and brings it on equal footing with business and technology. Thank you, and we'd love to hear your questions.
Thank you very much, Nina and Sabrina. That was very nice to just get some clarity, to have a model to orientate and to somehow operate as well, how to bring design into an organization and also what pitfalls there might be. Yes, to the audience, if you have any questions, just put them into the chat or in the Q&A. For me, the first question which came to mind, where do you start when you don't have a designer at all? Like what's the very first step when you don't have design yet there? How do you start? Hire the first designer, design your model. How do you go about it?
So one of the things that we saw was, designers coming in, coming out at the client that we were at. And in some situations, the importance of having that feedback loop with the customer becomes really imperative. So that feedback loop is a mechanism or a catalyst that you can justify to encourage the product owner the reasons why a designer needs to come on board. And also by emphasizing the amount of rework that's being done. So you're not doing high fidelity, you're doing low, really, at this point in terms of brutal sense. And then encouraging them that if they have the designer upfront and co-creating, they're actually going to release their resources to deliver more of what's in their backlog. So selling it from a financial and a time perspective, they start to realize the importance of doing that. The other thing is emphasizing where the end-to-end seamless experience breaks. In this case, we had a big stakeholder meeting. The very simple way to show that end-to-end seamless customer experience was not existing was just to put a one slider up with the 50 different variants of header. And you could just see the look of the faces of the stakeholders with, oh, I think we have a problem, right? And that immediately catalyzes the discussion of why do we have so much redundancy work going on?
Yeah, and I think really great point, Nina, on how we actually make that case for bringing design in, redundancy of work, but also making sure that we create a product that ends up being successful. And the way we do that is through the feedback mechanisms that Nina mentioned, where we get closer to customers to understand what creates value for them, so that we then actually create the products and services that people really want, right? Thinking about desirability.
I think it's nice how you put it, and I just like imagine this flying wheel there you have, and just like getting closer to the customer, which just enables that one, and just like it's a flying wheel. You define business, and at the same time like showing where you have devised and how things could go wrong on the other side, and then you really can play with that one in there. Would you have other elements how to speed that up? I've seen in some of the slides that like the duration always depends on how far the organization is. So how to speed it up? Like I can imagine that people are very impatient and it just takes time again. But like, what have you experienced in your work? What just like speeds the work up?
So one of the things that I've started to realize is we often try to push everything, with regard to design and change through the whole organization. It's a lot of effort. It's time consuming. It's tiring. You're sometimes running your head against a brick wall. Finding those catalysts, those influencers. So people that have the same mindset. So a cluster where you've got the designers who are not just receiving commands from the product owners, but are challenging back and coming back with good argumentations to ride the journey with them and to get them to showcase it. So one of the good things, if you're really smart about something like this, and don't do a showcase that's 2 weeks down the road, plan a showcase that's maybe 6 weeks down the road. So you have 3 sprints and you can really work with them to create an ultimate thing, and then invite the key people, the key stakeholders, not necessarily just the product owner, but it could be his or her manager, it could be other areas in finance, that they start to get this wow factor of actually co-creating high fidelity is worth the investment.
Yeah, and also if you think about the timeline that you mentioned, Alexander, when we're in a situation where there has been a false start, we do have, of course, a challenge of organizational change on our hands. So this makes it kind of a little bit harder and slower for us to move. That's why starting intentionally from day one, when your team is shaping for the first time, you can bring the customer feedback loop in from the beginning. You can pair with developers and bring them to customer interviews from day one. When we have started in a situation where business and technology lead and design and customer value has been seen as secondary, we need to take our champions on a journey, like Nina mentioned. And the timeline that we've kind of mapped out there from the next 3, 6, 9 months, it shows that actually it's an iterative journey that never completes. There should maybe not even be a timeline on there, because our context will keep changing, things will keep evolving, and we will always feel some kind of pain that we're not operating at the best that we could. But that's great. We should embrace that, because that shows us that things are moving forward, and that by adapting how we're working together and how we collaborate together, we can also evolve in the way that we're creating products.